All right, welcome everyone. My name is Richie Ratzak. I'm the assistant managing editor of the Record Journal. Tonight we're going to be having a forum with the 13th State Senate District candidates. So I'm joined by Democratic incumbent Mary Daugherty Abrams and Republican challenger Len Suzio. Tonight we're going to be asking a bunch of questions that were part of our Voices initiative at the Record Journal this time around for the elections. We wanted to hear from you, the voters. And we posed the question on our website, what do you want the candidates to be talking about as they compete for your vote? And we got a bunch of responses. People can still ask us questions throughout the election season, and we'll be chiming in with various candidates as we hold a few of these virtual candidate forums in place of what we would normally have, some of the live ones. So the rules for tonight, the candidates will get 90 seconds for an opening and closing statements. Then Matt and I will be asking questions for the candidates, and they get 2 minutes responses each. And then we have discretion to give 30-second rebuttals or any extended time if we're on a hot topic. So with that being said, I will turn it over. We did a coin flip ahead of time, and Len Suzio will start first with his opening statements. Len, you're muted.
There, sorry about that. Thank you, Richie and Matt, and welcome to the debate too, Mary. I was one of the things that drew me to public life is I love public debate. I love getting into a robust discussion about controversial issues and important issues to the community. And I was disappointed we weren't going to have one, but then I got the phone call last week telling me the Record Journal was going to do the debate. And I'm very positive about it. I'm looking forward to a robust and enthusiastic debate and an honest debate. And one thing that concerns me a little bit, and I like Mary and her family a lot, but in some of the ads she's been running, she's been making outright false claims against me. For example, she said I wrote Senate Bill 330, which was a bill for ultrasound imaging. I had nothing to do with that bill whatsoever. My name wasn't on it at all. I was asked to originate it with the senator who had sponsored it. I refused to do so. So I think it's important for us to be honest, no matter what our differences of opinion are, about what the other person says and does. And I would ask Mary tonight and in her future ads to make certain that what she says is accurate and honest. The voters deserve it. They need to know what the real story is, not some deceptive bit of advertising. Again, I look forward to the debate tonight. Thank you very much.
All right, Mary, and then you have 90 seconds on your side.
Thank you, Matt, and the Record Journal for hosting this event. I serve on the governor's COVID-19 task vaccine advisory group, and we had our first meeting tonight, so I appreciate you being flexible with this rescheduling. Good evening, I'm State Senator Mary Daugherty Abrams, and it's my privilege to represent the 13th District, which includes Meriden, Middlefield, Middletown, Rockville, and Chesham. 2 years ago, I ran promising to fight for our shared values. And as the chair of the Public Health Committee, that fight's taken a new meaning during the COVID-19 pandemic. It's been advocating for personal protective equipment for essential workers and for expanding testing. It's meant passing legislation to extend telehealth and put caps on insulin prices to protect people's health throughout this crisis. It's meant making access to voting safer so that no one has to choose between their health and their right to vote. I'm proud of our state. We've come together over the past 7 months, flattened the curve, slowly and safely reopening the state by following science and listening to experts. And even before the pandemic, we had accomplished so much. We raised the minimum wage, provided paid family medical leave, protected our water with the state water plan, expanded access to quality, affordable health care, and passed a budget that resulted in a historic rainy day fund. We have a lot to talk about, and I look forward to our discussion tonight.
All right, the first question that we have comes from our Voices initiative from reader Jeffrey Fraser. And Mary, you'd mentioned the COVID response, and that's kind of where this goes to. So since Len went first, you'll be answering the question first. Has Governor Lamont chosen the correct pace to relax COVID-19 restrictions, or should he be reopening the state faster?
I am very proud of what we've accomplished in this state. I think that we are in the forefront of the pandemic recovery because of the decisions that our governor has made with the input from science and experts. I know the Commissioner of Public Health has worked very hard and very closely with the governor. I understand that there has been an economic cost to having our state shut down, but we have to put the health and safety of people first. And a slow and steady reopening is what the science recommends. It would be foolish and actually disastrous to just reopen the state. We'd go backward from all the gains that we've made. And also, unless people have a real confidence in their own health and safety, we could open things up, but it doesn't mean that people would take advantage of those things. If they're not feeling comfortable and feeling that they're safe, then it's really foolish to try to do more than what we're ready to do. So I think that the things that the governor has done in terms of, you know, starting to open schools up and look at hybrid models and different ways to do education. I think that what he's done with keeping manufacturing open throughout this entire pandemic has seemed to be the right thing. I don't think you can argue with the results that we've had. I think other states are very, are very envious of what we've been able to accomplish. There's still been challenges that we continue to work on, like what's happened in our nursing homes. The governor commissioned a report from Mathematica that we recently had an informational forum on, and I'll be working on a task force to continue to look at that and make sure we're doing the very best we can in our nursing homes. Thank you.
All right, Len, then over to you.
Yes, I would beg to differ with Mary's comment that you can't criticize the results. The results, in my opinion, attest to a failure, a serious failure on the part of the Lamont administration and Mary in her role as a co-chair of the health committee, the public health committee. What am I referring to? Well, Connecticut it's the 30th most populous state, but we're ranked number 15 in terms of deaths due to COVID virus. If you look at the mortality rate for COVID-19, Connecticut is ranked 4th in the entire country, behind only New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. That's deaths per 100,000 population. So while the image of the administration is that it's been successful in containing and controlling the virus and mitigating its effects, the reality is it's failed. It's failed abysmally. We should never be close to the worst in the whole country, behind New York, again, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. That, to me, the numbers tell me of failure. Adding to that was a news article I read in early September where the administration had decided, the Department of Social Services had decided to withhold personal protective equipment from home health care aides. They were going to give them only 5 masks every quarter. These are people who are poor themselves, and they're serving people who are very needy and can't be exposed to people who aren't properly protected. SEIU 1099 complained bitterly that the health of the 10,000 healthcare workers affected by this and all their patients was being adversely affected. I'd like to know, where was the governor? Why did he allow that to happen? And why did Mary, as co-chair of the health committee, public health committee, tolerate this? That something should have been done to intervene and to correct this so that the healthcare workers themselves and their health is protected, as well as their patients.
All right, Mary, he called you out. Did you want to respond to that?
Sure. We have been working closely with the agencies, with DSS, DPH, DDS, and DMIS throughout this entire crisis. I think one of the reasons that the numbers are high is because of our location. It happened to hit here first and hard because of our proximity to major urban areas like New York and Boston. So I don't think that that was through any fault of anyone's. There have been issues with protective equipment, and I have been fighting for those and working with 1199 on all those issues.
May I just make a 15-second or 10-second comment?
Yeah, all right. Go ahead.
Yes, I think the failure rate was due to a lack of proper attention to the nursing homes and the elderly, the most vulnerable. you can look at the statistics and see that the elderly suffered and died disproportionately. And that's true, of course, of New York, Massachusetts, and New Jersey as well. But there was a failure on the part of the administration to recognize that they had to protect the most vulnerable, the people in the nursing homes. They failed to do that. And that's why we have that high mortality rate.
Can I just respond to that, please? I just want to say that that we began with the question of whether or not we were opening the state. And I still think that we are doing the right thing in terms of how we're moving forward with opening our state. So I just wanted to make that clear. That was the focus of my initial answer. But if we're going to talk about nursing homes and the challenges that happen there, I'm happy to talk about that as well.
No, we're gonna move on. We've got a bunch of questions that we want to get to, and we want the voters to hear on a number of different topics. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you for the next question.
Yeah, I'll stay on the pandemic and look sort of zoomed out at the budget. The state's revenues are expected to sharply decline as a result of the pandemic. And as you both know, the state has a balanced budget requirement, unlike Congress. So in light of this, we received a question from reader Steve Iavana, who wants to know, how would you plan on handling future state budgets in light of the declining revenues? If you want to cut spending or raise revenues, please be as specific as possible where you do that.
I believe, Len, this goes to you first.
Yeah, just getting used to this. Yes, first of all, we know that we're looking at a forecasted deficit, a record-breaking forecasted deficit of over $7 billion for the next biennium, the last I looked. And the rainy day fund isn't going to come close to making up for anything of that at all. So we're going to have a new way of looking at the budget. And what I'm afraid of is if the Democrats continue to control the legislature, their history proves that they're going to go for tax increases, and they're going to be enormous tax increases. That's the kind of thing that's killed the state of Connecticut. Connecticut is really in dire straits, because not just because of the pandemic, but it was already sick financially and fiscally. We're the only one of 2 states in the entire country that have not recovered economic activity from 2007, the pre-Great Recession that occurred back in 2008. Our economic activity is less than it was 12 years ago. Any state that's got that kind of a downward trend is going to have dire financial problems. And you have to ask why. Why was Connecticut one of only 2 states that failed to grow and recover from the Great Recession? And I have to say, I believe it's because of misbegotten government policy here, the tax and spend mentality that exists up in Hartford. We had the biggest tax increase in the history of the state under Governor Malloy. Then we had the second biggest tax increase. And then we had the third one in 2017. Tax increases don't do it. We do have to cut. We're going to have to look hard. And I'll give you a couple of quick items. One is I would take a hard look at the subsidy we provide for wealthy commuters that commute from Fairfield County to New York City. We subsidize that to the tune of $130 million a year. Those taxpayers are the wealthiest in the country, and they don't pay any Connecticut state income tax because all the income they make in New York City is taxed in New York, and it's deductible against their state income tax. So that's one area I start in. And if we come back to this, I got plenty more I could say, but I've reached the end of my time, so thank you.
All right, and then Mary, over to you.
Hi, well, I am curious about the idea that I'm a tax and spend Democrat, because actually our general fund expenditures last year went down by 0.3% for $60 million. And we've had a surplus for the first time after having a deficit for 4 years. So I think that my record in terms of our budget is a strong one. I would also say that the evidence of the budget that we created, having a historic rainy day fund where, you know, the money that went into that is helping us now. And that's 15% of the general fund has to go into that money. And it has actually topped off enough that we've also been able to pay down some of our debt, which is, you know, pretty historic when it comes to how finances have happened here in our state. It shows that we are on the right track, that we're doing the right things, that we are prudent in our understanding. This has also resulted in us getting good bond ratings, which helps us borrow money for less money for less interest. And I think that we are doing a very good job being the stewards of the money for this state. There are going to have to be incredibly difficult decisions as we move forward. I think to try to predict what those will be is nearly impossible given what we've been through in the last 7 months. So I think it's incredibly important that we elect people that we know share our values, that will look at those things and make those decisions based on values that we hold dear and take care of those areas that we think should be taken care of. So I'm ready to do that, to move forward. I enjoyed being on appropriations, and I think that we've done a good job with the budget, came in, did it, and it's resulted in putting us in a good financial position. So thank you.
And just staying on the pandemic and its ripple effects, what action should the General Assembly take to help Connecticut businesses continue to weather the pandemic and improve the business climate in Connecticut as the virus remains a risk?
I'm sorry, Matt, I need you to repeat that. I apologize.
Oh, no worries. What action should the General Assembly take to help Connecticut businesses continue to weather the pandemic and improve the business climate in Connecticut?
I think one of the things moving forward is going to be job growth. We have people who are out of work in record numbers. We're going to have to find ways to improve our job growth. We are a state with highly educated, talented workforce, and we need to take advantage of that and continue to move in the direction where we focus on having people trained for the occupations that are coming and moving up. So yesterday I visited an aerospace program that's opened up now at Middletown High School. It's amazing. And I think those are the kind of ideas, knowing what's coming up and what kind of careers we can move people in and helping people change careers. I think the other thing that we really need to do is to continue to support our municipalities in the development of their, for instance, in this district, there are several business development projects going on. The downtown area in Meriden, has taken advantage of the train station, has started to build housing down there. We need to keep that growth happening. Middletown is looking to expand their riverfront program. I think those are all things that we need to make Connecticut as business friendly as we can. And I do think it's interesting that so many people are moving into our state now. Our real estate market is booming. People want to live here. It's kind of set the whole notion that people want to live in urban areas. The pandemic has set that on its ear. So people are looking for the kind of lifestyle that we offer here in Connecticut. And I think we have to take advantage of that and show, because businesses will move where their employees want to be. So I think we need to continue to take advantage of what's happening and the growth in and attractiveness of our state. And I would say lastly, I think we have to stop talking negatively about Connecticut. It's a fantastic place to be. And we should continue to let people know that so they come. Thank you.
All right, Len, then over to you.
Thank you. I actually unmuted myself just on time. Yes, first of all, of course, we're operating where thousands of Connecticut businesses are operating under severe restrictions. And until those restrictions are lifted, Connecticut's going to continue to limp along economically. So it's important that those restrictions be lifted as soon as possible. And as an aside, I think the focus on infections is really a misleading focus when it comes to COVID-19. The real focus is the hospitalizations. Thousands of people could come down with the virus but have little or no symptoms, basically. And so they don't even sometimes know that they're ill. And so as long as the hospitalizations are kept down, and they peaked out at just under 2,000 back in May, I think it was. And the last I looked, there were 150 or 170. The whole idea behind the pandemic response was not to eradicate the COVID-19, at least not immediately, but it was to basically flatten the curve. That's all you heard back in March and April, was we had to flatten the curve so that the healthcare system did not get overwhelmed. Well, We succeeded in doing that. And I think because of that, we could let up the pressure a little bit more and try and see how the people respond if we lift these restrictions and let people do their business. Many people are going to go out with a mask, whether they're mandated to do so or not. So I think we have to trust the citizens that they're going to be prudent in response to their conduct in public. Also, we have to look at focusing on small businesses. They're the backbone of employment in Connecticut. We have to deregulate. Every survey I've seen about Connecticut, the business community has constantly complained about heavy-handed regulation, and then the unstable nature of the state's business and fiscal climate scares businesses because they just see a legislature that's inclined to tax year in and year out to make up for a budget deficit, and that scares a lot of businesses away. Thank you.
All right, moving along, we have another question from the Voices Initiative from reader Tom Panone regarding gun violence in Meriden. What we propose is legislation to stop the shootings and violent crime in Meriden and Connecticut. Do you believe stronger judicial laws need to be in place to actually hold criminals accountable? Len, that's over to you.
Right. That's a great question, particularly in light of the anti-policing legislation that just passed, which is just the worst piece of legislation we could have passed at the worst time. I had the good fortune to meet with a group of cops, local cops yesterday. They were all extremely upset about the anti-policing bill and the onus it puts on them. There was an article in the Hartford Current only 2 days ago about how crime is now up in Hartford in the last month. And the police ascribe it to the fact that their hands are tied. They can't be proactive like they were before because they're fearful for assuming liability. So this law was very badly timed, and I think we're going to pay dearly for it. And I think that law's got to be reconsidered, and it should have never been rushed through. They should have waited to the next session instead of doing it in a special session. There was no need to rush it like that. I feel that the legislature betrayed the men and women in blue. They basically gave them all a black eye because, apparently people like Mary think that racism is systemic in the law enforcement community. Well, I don't believe that. I believe there's exceptions here and there. There always is, no matter what group of people you're talking about. But I don't believe that racism is systemic in the law enforcement community. And I look at how racially diverse it is, by the way, in Meriden. It's impossible for me to think of it as being systemic in Meriden. But the law is leveled against all the Meriden police officers too, many of whom I know were threatening to resign. So if we want to protect the community, the first thing we got to think about is protecting our police and making certain that they have the protections that they need when they go out and risk life and limb, confronting criminals who are violent in nature, and they don't know who they're going to confront. They open up a door, there's a domestic dispute going on, they may be facing a gun right in their face. So I think that was ill-begotten legislation, perfectly wrongly timed, and it was a big mistake.
All right, Mary, then over to you.
Well, I hope we can get back to police accountability because I would very much like to talk about that topic. However, the question was about the gun violence recently in Meriden, so I'm going to keep my comments focused on the question at hand. And to blame the police accountability bill for that, I think is a mistake because it doesn't even go into effect until next summer. So I don't see the connection there. I will say that since COVID hit, we've been on weekly and now bi-weekly calls with our local government here in Meriden, and that includes our new Chief Rosado. And we discussed what was going on with the gun violence, and he shared that his concern about whether or not what's happening could be people recidivism or people who have a background or previous arrests. We know that this is a problem that's happening throughout our state. It's not a problem exclusive to Meriden, but it is a concern. And some of what he shared with me, I've been looking into in terms of making sure that we have good communication and that what's happening from the perspective of the local police department is being communicated on a state level, and that we're looking at it from a state lens. Excuse me. We've held several We've held several anti-gun violence rallies in the city because with the Meriden Police Department, and led by led mostly by City Councilor Sonia Jelks. And we've been out there in these neighborhoods, driving through them, letting people know, sharing information about where they could call, letting them know that we know what's happening. We want to work with them. We're working with the police, and we will continue to do so. I've passed some serious gun legislation that, for instance, banning ghost guns and safe storage in cars and things that I think contribute to keeping us safer in our communities. Thank you.
Matt, may I respond for 20 seconds?
Yeah, go ahead. 30 seconds.
Okay. Well, 30. Thank you very much. Well, if you don't believe that the new law hasn't affected this, talk to the police themselves. I've heard it directly from them. A little story I'll tell you. 3 years ago, when I was in the legislature, Chief Cassette contacted me. Back at that time, there was another rash of gun violence in the city. And the police were able to handle it and eradicate it. And the reason they were able to do it was because they got wind that these criminals were being harbored in some of the public housing projects in downtown Meriden. And they collaborated with the public housing authority people who disclosed to them the identities of these renters. And they went and threatened to evict them if they continued to harbor criminals. Within 3 days, the violence was gone. It stopped. And so what happened was the legislature got wind of this, and they passed a law forbidding public housing administrators from communicating with the police about this. And so Chief Cassette asked me if I could get it reversed because it was a great law enforcement tool to stop gun violence in the community, but I couldn't get it through the Democratic controlled legislature. That's law enforcement's firsthand account of an effective crime tool that the legislature refused to address.
Okay, we're going to give Mary 60 seconds if she wants it to respond, just because we let Len go over. Mary, do you want to add your 60 seconds in?
Sure. What I was starting to say was, I voted on serious gun legislation, one of which was safe storage of guns in cars, because we know that guns get stolen, and that's when they're used in crimes. Mr. Suzio, when he was in office, however, did not vote for banning of bump stocks, which allows the person to turn their weapon into an automatic weapon. So I think that, working on serious gun legislation is important in this. And I also believe that exactly what Mr. Suzio was saying, that's why we've been out in these neighborhoods. We've been talking to the people who live there. We've been encouraging them to call the numbers and report and letting them know. And we've been doing this along with our police force. I am very much impressed with the police force here in Meriden. I appreciate our community policing program that we have. And I think that they're working very hard to solve this.
So who takes the next question now? I couldn't keep up with the game of tennis.
I think it's Mary now. I think I started out with it, if I'm not mistaken.
Gotcha.
You agree with that, Mary, or not? I think
Good. Okay. So, Mary, in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests following the George Floyd tragedy, is more action needed to promote racial equity beyond the police accountability legislation passed this year?
I believe that, I talked to so many people in this district who told me personal stories about ways that racism has affected their lives. And, to quote James Baldwin, there's a famous quote that he said that not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it's faced. And I think that we owe it to the people in our community who've experienced racism that we acknowledge it, that we listen to what they say, and that we work hard to find ways in our system to eradicate racism. It's not something that's going to happen immediately, but when I hear stories from parents, from mothers and fathers and grandparents about their fear of their child going out during, the night and what might happen, you see things happening in stories on the news in terms of how people are treated based on the color of their skin. And, it's just one of those things where unless those of us who are not affected by it don't stand up and say we will not tolerate this, then we are never going to make it safe for everyone. And I believe very strongly that everyone in our community needs to be treated with fairness and respect, regardless of the color of their skin, their nationality, their religion, their gender, or any of those things. So I think that, you know, it's not that, as I think Mr. Suzio just said, that I believe there's racism in the police force. I believe racism exists in our society, and they're no more immune to it than anyone else. So we're looking at all of our systems and to make sure that we do whatever we can to mitigate it and to start to acknowledge it and to move our country and our state and our district in a different direction. Thank you.
Matt, would you just reiterate the question? Because I was thinking about some things that Mary was saying, and I just want to make sure I got the question right.
Yeah, no problem. Let me pull it up.
It was about Black Lives Matter.
In the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests following the George Floyd tragedy, is more action needed to promote racial equity beyond the police accountability legislation passed this year?
I guess this is where Mary and I have a big fundamental difference. I look at racism as an exception to the rule, not systemic, which she has articulated. I don't believe it's widespread in our community and widespread in our police force. You're always going to look at Black Lives Matter, the rallies, the protests, the riots have always been in response to a perceived abuse by the police of their right to enforce law. The George Floyd killing was a tragic incident, and one that I don't know a single American that I've talked to about it is not appalled and disgusted by what they saw. So, but that was not systemic racism. It was racism being practiced by one particular law enforcement officer. And so I look at it this way. I look at it that most of the protests and rallies have been in response to perceived abuse and perceived systemic racism in the law enforcement community, not in the community in general. This is not to say there aren't incidents of racism that occur. When you have a community of 60,000 people, there's going to be some racists in the community. There's no doubt about that. But I wouldn't characterize and the whole community is guilty of systemic racism, because that inculpates everybody. And I don't think that it's that widespread. My wife and I took in young Black pregnant women for years in our house. They were poor. They're almost all Black or minority, and we got to know them very closely. They didn't complain about that of racism. They did complain about the abuses, ironically, within their own family, where unfortunately a lot of these girls were abused by their fathers. And so I just think to characterize the entire community and label it with racism, I think is just, that doesn't reflect community values at all to me. It reflects a totally ill-conceived idea of what the community is really like here in Meriden.
All right, next question. Connecticut electricity customers pay the highest rate in the continental U.S., trailing only Hawaii and Alaska among all 50 states. While some of the reasons for this, like lack of natural gas resources and the state's geography, are outside of the legislature's control, there are policies passed by the General Assembly, like environmental mandates, renewable energy requirements, that also contribute to the higher costs. Given the widespread outrage earlier this year over the Eversource Energy rate hike, what are you as a state senator willing to do to help make electricity more affordable for residents?
I guess it's me now, right? Okay. Yes, I've written several op-ed columns about this. And the truth is that the high cost of electricity in Connecticut has got more to do with the politics in Hartford than lack of natural resources. Look at, in Meriden, we pay almost 24 cents per kilowatt hour for electricity. In Wallingford, it's 12.1 cents. What is going on here? Why is Eversource charging so much more? Well, part of that is lax enforcement by the Public Utilities Regulatory Authority. I don't believe Eversource should be allowed to get such high rates of return, 9 to 12% on such a low risk business. And I think that's got to be reconsidered and reviewed. But beyond that, there's the mandate for renewable energy resources, which are extremely expensive. Wind energy basically costs three times what it costs for gas-fired energy. So if people like Mary and the Democrats in the legislature want to force down the throats of Connecticut people renewable energy mandates, they ought to at least let them know what the premium is, which is dramatic. And they're due to, by the way, increase the mandate, double it between now and 2030. So people who think they're getting high rates of electricity already, just beginning of this. Wind and solar cannot be economically competitive. They aren't even close to being economically competitive. And if we're going to force the people of Connecticut to swallow renewable energy as a policy, they ought to be told what the cost is. If someone's going to end up paying $80 a month more for renewable energy, then let them know that before, and then let them express their opinion whether they're willing to pay that price. Now, this gets into climate change and some other issues, which I've also written. But I believe the way the legislature can correct this is by freezing and not increasing the mandate, and maybe even decreasing it a bit until we get fully recovered economically, because it's also not hurting consumers, it's hurting businesses. It's another reason why businesses don't want to come to Connecticut. We have such high energy costs. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, part of what Mr. Suzio was talking about, I do agree with him, and that is about Eversource. I think that, when I started, one of the first bills that I introduced was a bill that allowed municipalities to purchase their own electric and gas supplies. I was a resident of Wallingford at one point in my life, and so I know exactly what the difference is in terms of the rates. And I agree that we need to hold Eversource accountable. And that's why I was so happy to be able to vote in the last special session for the bill that we call Take Back the Grid Bill. Does it answer every question? No. But it does hold Eversource accountable for their rate increases based on their performance. And that's a big change. People can get reimbursed for losses during what am I trying to say? When their electricity isn't working, I'll say that, for any loss of food or for medicines. And there's civil penalties if it goes on for longer than 4 days. There's also, PURA is able to consider, and this one I think is really important, the executive's compensation when they're looking at a rate increase. I think that PURA has not had the teeth it should have. I think we have to continue to make it stronger so that it can deal with those things. I think that we need to take PURA out of deep, and in our debate of the bill, the Senate chair of the Energy Committee said that they would be looking at that. So I was encouraged by that. I also think we have a Connecticut Office of Consumer Counsel, which should be, they oversee the utilities, and I think that we should strengthen them so that we get a consumer voice in there. Lastly, I will say that Mr. Suzio did not vote. He was one of 3 no's on the Clean Energy Bill, which is a bipartisan bill, and where they did work on these issues in terms of clean energy. I believe in climate change. I believe we have a responsibility to move towards clean energy. And so I think on that point, we very much disagree. Thank you.
Matt, may I add to that a little bit? Because I think this is a very important issue. It certainly was a hot button issue this summer when people were shocked by the electric rates they have to pay and the unreliability of the electricity at the same time.
Yeah, we can give you another 30 seconds.
Yeah,
Okay.
but 30 seconds.
Okay. The politicians in Hartford want to blame Eversource for it. Eversource definitely deserves its share of the blame, but it's the politicians in Hartford and their policies that are responsible for the largest part of our whopping energy costs. Last year, Mary voted for a bill. It was a bill that HB 7156 that ordered the purchase of wind power from Revolution Wind. Revolution Wind, by the way, 3 times the cost of gas-fired power. Half the plant, or half of Revolution Wind, is owned by, guess who? Eversource. They're able to, basically, they're going to make a lot of money on wind power as well, and we're going to get shafted, and that's because the legislature is cramming it down our throats.
Mary, do you want 30 seconds now?
Yes, please. I'm happy to be voting for things that look at alternative sources for energy. I think it's our responsibility to take care of our environment, to look at those things and to get off fossil fuels and other other supplies of energy that that affect our climate. And so that's my responsibility, and I'm happy to do it. I'm also happy to hold Eversource and any other utility accountable for what they're doing to the consumer. Thank you.
Okay, so I guess this goes back to Mary now. Right before the pandemic hit, the governor pulled the plug on the trucks only toll proposal as both chambers were dragging their feet on holding a vote. The issue has been put on the shelf, obviously, ever since, but if tolls were to come up again next session, would you support it? And if not, how does Connecticut pay for its transportation projects?
Thank you, Matt. I believe that this is, I will say what I've said this was a question when I was running 2 years ago. And I have had the same answer all along, which is show me the plan and I'll tell you if I'll vote for it. And in my time in the legislature, we saw many different plans. And so I don't think it's a absolute yes or no answer. And I don't think that's how you do good governance. I don't think that you come in with absolutes. I think you listen, you talk, you compromise, and you find the best solutions to the problems. We have a problem. We have a problem with our transportation fund. We have a problem with the infrastructure in our state. We have over 300 bridges and a tunnel that's been rated in poor condition. A third of the bridges were built before 1950. You know, the New Haven rail line has 4 bridges that were built a century ago. So our transportation system needs attention. There is no doubt about that. Transportation is also an investment in our economy. You know, highway accessibility is one of the things, and transportation is one of the things that businesses look at when they decide whether or not to move into a community. It also affects the quality of people's lives. If you are spending hours on the highway that you could be spending tucking your child in at night, or, you know, talking to your parents, or whatever it is you want to do, that's a problem. So we really need to figure out how we're going to do this. And it can't be one of those things where you rob Peter to pay Paul. You can't take it from the rainy day fund or the general fund without admitting that that's going to put a significant dent in it. So we have to look for other things. And I am open to compromising, looking at all kinds of plans, looking at how those plans affect this district, and making my decision based on that. Thank you.
All set?
Yeah, to
Okay.
you, Len.
Yes. Well, I think everyone in the district knows I was an outspoken opponent of tolls. We do know that Mary did indicate she supported tolls on trucks at her December town hall meeting on the internet. We have a recording of her saying that, in fact. So I do agree with her, though. One of the big problems is never been a plan. There was a $100 billion, quote, plan put forward by the Malloy administration that was really not a plan. No one in the legislature ever seriously looked at it or questioned a darn thing in it. When I raised this at a hearing, the Transportation Committee hearing last year, Senator, what's the name, the co-chair of the committee, Leone, he told me that was not a plan. It was a, quote, aspirational list. But it was $100 billion. It was the basis for saying we desperately need tolls because we aren't going to have enough money to pay for all the expenditures. Well, you don't plan tolls on a bogus plan that's an aspirational list. And it didn't come out until I forced it during the hearing when Senator Leone admitted it. So number one. Number two, the cost within the plan, aspirational list, wild and unsubstantiated. The Mixmaster in Waterbury was in for $3.5 billion. Guess what? They're working on it right now, and the cost is $250 million, not $3.5 billion. Now, somebody might say, Mary might say, well, Len, that's a short-term fix. It's not. According to the Commissioner Gigliotti, it's a 20-year fix. That's not a short-term fix. So a $3.5 billion cost really became a $250 million cost. And I can cite specific projects because I went through it one by one. Next, in 2 weeks, I have a FOIA hearing because I didn't get all the information that I wanted. And so I'm going to be forcing the administration to hand over all the costs and all the details that back up their so-called plan. That's what we need. We need people up in Hartford that are going to aggressively push for answers and not just accept what the administration and the bureaucrats throw at them.
All right, the next question again comes from our Voices Initiative from Madeline Gallagher, who's kind of ties in with some national news right now. If the U.S. Supreme Court overturns Roe v. Wade, should the Connecticut legislature restrict women's reproductive choices? I believe that goes to Len first.
I've always said that, first of all, it remains to be seen whether the Supreme Court is going to actually overturn Roe v. Wade. And if they do, will they remand it back to the states or will it be a national ban? But assuming that they do overturn it and they remand it to the states, I've always said that abortion is a double tragedy. It's a tragedy for the woman who undergoes the abortion, and it's a tragedy for the child that's being aborted in the process. I mean, and this is the whole basis of the pro-choice movement, is they deny the humanity and the reality of the child in the womb. I feel sorry for the women who undergo abortions. If you ask them, by the way, they almost always, if you ask them, why did you have an abortion? The answer you almost always get is, I had to have an abortion because my boyfriend forced me or because of my career, etc. It's not the language of freedom. It's a language of coercion. Now, look, I know where the country is right now. There's no way, I mean, any kind of a ban is going to be enforceable because too many people don't accept the reality, the brutal, violent, destructive reality of abortion. So I think, however, things like parental notification laws, which is a bill I did introduce when I was in the legislature, that would require a 13, 14, or 15-year-old, her parents to be notified that she's going to have an abortion, a surgical abortion. That, I think, would be an appropriate kind of legislation. When I talked about it in the legislature, a legislator from Rhode Island came and testified in my committee hearing, and she said that they have a problem in Rhode Island because there are juveniles being transported across the state border from Rhode Island to Connecticut to get surgical abortions because Rhode Island does have a parental notification ban. And it's so bad that they said that they were actually considering a law to make it a felony to transport a child across the state border for a surgical abortion. Those are the kinds of restrictions I think are reasonable and that most of the public would accept. And then finally, maybe late-term abortions, there should be a little more limitation on that, and that be more practical and achievable as well.
Okay, Mary, then over to you.
Thank you. I unequivocally believe in a woman's right to choose. It is a personal choice that many women need to go and speak with their doctor or whoever they choose to counsel with. But it is a woman's body and a woman's right to choose. And I think that, it makes me reflect back on missing Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the Supreme Court, because she understood that and she fought for it. And I am concerned that our new Supreme Court makeup will take on Roe v. Wade and will decide that that take away that right from women. And so we are a firewall. We have a state law that protects women and allows them to have the right to choose. And I would hate to see someone elected to our legislature that would work to undo that and not protect the women in our state. The other thing is that, the Trump administration worked hard to defund Planned Parenthood, making it difficult for them to get federal funds. And I know that Mr. Suzio, when he was in, tried also to take away funding from them. I did the opposite. I worked hard to try to replace state funds with the federal monies that Planned Parenthood lost. And the reason is because Planned Parenthood takes care usually of poor women, but of women who need pelvic exams and breast exams and STI testing and treatment and cancer screenings. And there's so much more to the services that they do. So I am a strong voice, a strong advocate, and I will continue to be, to support a woman's right to choose and to support Planned Parenthood and other organizations that support women's health. Thank you.
I'll just, if I could.
30 seconds, Len.
Sure. Planned Parenthood was founded by Margaret Sanger, one of the greatest racists and eugenicists of all times. The Nazis actually studied eugenics as practiced by Margaret Sanger. It became so obvious that this summer, New York City changed the name of a street. It was called Margaret Sanger Square. They realized that she was a pretty unsavory character, and the organization that she founded is still doing the work that she founded it for. And it was, her motto was birth control to create a race of thoroughbreds. That was her motto on her newspaper.
And Mary, 30 seconds if you want it.
I think that the work that Planned Parenthood does in our state speaks for itself. Like I said, they are focused on the health of women and men, but mostly women who really need those services or wouldn't get health care otherwise, for things like I said, the pelvic exams and breast exams and cancer screenings and a whole array of health. And so I think to characterize them that way is totally wrong in terms of what they accomplish and do for our state. Thank you.
All right, we're going to move on. Next question, I forget who this goes to, but the literal and figurative isolation brought on by the pandemic has been difficult for people overcoming and recovering from a drug addiction. A record 1,200 Connecticut residents died from an unintentional overdose last year, and the state is on pace to break that record again this year. As a state senator, how would you help curb the current trend of new overdose records being set in the state every year?
I believe this goes to Mary first.
I lose track as well. Thank you very much. Opioid abuse has been obviously something that we've worked hard on through the Public Health Committee, working with both public health and the Department of Mental Health and Addicted Services. In the 2019 session, we were able to pass legislation that made it that would not allow insurance companies to exclude or in any way penalize in coverage anyone who had a Narcan prescription. And we try to open up training for people to use that, family or friends or anyone who might be able to save someone's life using that. We also had past part of that law said that when filling an opioid prescription, the pharmacist would have to speak with the buyer about the prescription and the safe use of it. And anybody who was getting a prescription for 12 weeks or more would need a treatment care plan that would include discussing with their physician alternate ways for pain medication. We also had that if you went to a hospital for non-fatal overdose, that you would have a mental health screening. So all of these are ways that we are trying to work on. We also included legislation in there that expanded helping higher education facilities have Narcan available and have training for their first responders, and to have a plan in place so that they could address the any opioid issues on their campus. We continue to work. My co-chair and I have pulled together stakeholders from hospitals, from treatment programs, from higher ed, from public safety, everything, and had working groups to talk about how best we combat this. It is predicted to be getting worse because of COVID, and we need to be prepared to continue to fight hard because every one of those numbers is a person's life, and we need to save them. Thank you.
Yes, in the last few months I was in the Senate, I got very close to this issue. I worked with groups that were involved in it. We brought in, there was a great program in Manchester that was a collaboration between law enforcement and healthcare officials in the city of Manchester. And it had been in effect for 3 or 4 years at that point in time. It had great success because one of the problems, of course, is with drug addiction and drug abuse is that technically you're breaking the law at the same time you got a serious health crisis. And so a lot of people are afraid to go for help. And in the Manchester program, it fostered a collaborative relationship between law enforcement where they would take someone who had overdosed to the hospital and leave them there. There would be no legal impediment or law-breaking problems at all. And it had great success. And the police chief in Manchester was going around touting it. And I thought it was great. We brought it here to Meriden. Chief Cassette and the hospital officials. We had several meetings over it. We were actually about to introduce it in November that year when I lost the election. And they did eventually adopt some of it, but not the whole program. I think one thing that's really important in successfully addressing this problem is to work with the families whose children have been suspect or susceptible to drug abuse and drug overdoses. There's a great organization, Roadway for Hope, here in Meriden, that's made of parents of families with kids who have had drug problems. And there's no better place to get information and how to treat this than the families who are personally, immediately, and directly affected by it. And I would urge, whoever it is, whether I'm back in office or Mary's back there, I think we ought to pursue getting the families more involved and giving them more say in this. I know that Sue Willett, who runs Roadway for Hope, is somewhat frustrated by the outcome, the way the program was eventually put together here. She feels there's a lot of money that's not going directly into benefiting the victims, but more into advertising and things like that and administration. So I think that's the kind of thing, if I were state senator, I would definitely take a hard look at what's actually being done here and what its shortfalls might be. It's a serious problem, and it should be a high priority for the state.
So I have two higher education questions that I want to fit in, and I know we're running up on time. Is it okay with you guys if we go 1 minute each on both to try to fit both in?
You might hear some of my grandchildren running around the background, but that's okay by me if it's all right with Mary.
Okay. I don't know who this is to, but so it was reported last week that the Connecticut State College University system informed the governor that they need a $69 million bailout from the state to erase a deficit in this year's budget alone, caused in part by declining enrollment. The University of Connecticut is also saying that they need additional support for this fiscal year. So my question is, how far should the state go in bailing out its public university systems during the pandemic?
This goes to Len.
Yes, the state of Connecticut, before this latest request, the last numbers I looked at, we subsidize UConn to between $500 and $600 million a year, and the UConn Health Center another $500 million a year. So the UConn and the UConn Health Center are quite a large item in the Connecticut budget. And I think it's next year, whether it's Mary or me in there, we're going to have to look at priorities and what we do. We won't be able to accommodate everybody's request. So it's going to be a question of what are the priorities, what are the most important spending priorities, and where are we going to have to cut? And I look at things like Mary and I were at this homeless housing coalition this morning. Those are life and death situations, and clearly they've got to be a priority. Higher education is definitely important, but on the list of priorities, it's not there at the top for me. It's the life and death issues and the citizens who are vulnerable who have to get the priority first. And if need be, maybe UConn's going to have to change its tuition and find other sources of revenue to make up for this. It's a small amount of money relative to their budget, that's for sure.
There we go.
Mary.
Okay. I'm not surprised at all by that number. I think that there has been a huge impact on higher education, not just in Connecticut, but everywhere. Unfortunately, one of the things that we worked on was to make higher education more affordable to young people in our state, and training programs. We were looking at a debt-free college program. And so I really think that we need to continue to support as best we can. I don't disagree with Mr. Suzio in the fact that, we are going to have to make some tough decisions. But the monies that you get back from educating young people, the money that you get back from having young people who go to the community college system, they stay here, they work here, and they build our economy. So there is a positive to supporting that program and keeping higher education healthy here in our state. Thank you.
And staying on higher education, obviously it's a big part of the economy, a big part of the state's labor force. With higher education facing so many major changes during the pandemic, what steps will you take to make sure Connecticut residents have access to college and/or other job training?
I think I go first this time. And I think I pretty much answered that. I do believe that those monies that you invest, you get back. I think, as I spoke at the beginning of this discussion, that job growth is going to be incredibly important as we move forward, and as is retraining. So we need to have programs available for young people to get trained for jobs. We are a talented workforce in this state. It's one of the things that draws businesses here is our educational system. And so I think we need to support that, because it only feeds on itself and allows us to continue to grow jobs and build our economy, and keep our young people here in the state, which is very important if we're going to have the economy that we want to build in Connecticut.
Okay. I think that basically, if we're going to financially support students to attend our colleges, there should be some kind of payback in the form of potentially staying here and working in the state. Too often we fund scholarships and help students from out of state and who then leave the state and they're gone. I would like very much to see that that we do something to make certain that if we're going to help students get the education they want, there should be some reciprocal obligation to the state itself. Our community college system, by the way, is a fantastic educational bargain. I mean, for people who can't afford to go to a full 4-year university, the community colleges offer an excellent educational opportunity. It's one of the resources, the great resources the state does have, that I think does distinguish it from many other states. It's an asset and a resource that we should value, and that should be something the legislature should keep in mind when it comes to the budget next year.
I think we have time for one more question before closing remarks. And since this will probably be my last question, I just wanted to thank Len and Mary for following the time limits tonight and being flexible with the format. It's good to know we can still have productive debates on the local level here. The Affordable Care Act is a federal policy, but each state has some leeway in how some elements get implemented. What can Connecticut do to make the Affordable Care Act achieve its stated goal of reducing costs while improving access to care?
Well, I guess that's me.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. When I was in the legislature, there was actually a bill that was proposed and passed in the Senate and eventually passed. Actually, when I think about it, maybe it didn't become law, but there was a bill that was anticipating that Obamacare, or the ACA, the American Affordability Care Act, was going to be terminated, and there was some concern about its impact on Connecticut citizens. And the bill that was passed, and I voted for it, was if the ACA was either adjudicated to be by the court to be unconstitutional, or if the federal government changes plan, the state of Connecticut was going to supplement or replace the key elements in the Affordable Care Act. So we've done something. I just honestly don't remember. I know it passed the Senate. I think Governor Malloy vetoed it because of the cost, if I'm not mistaken. And of course, that's an issue that whatever we do to try to help people out next year, be it healthcare, education, or anything, the cost is going to be a major factor, and we are going to have our hands tied very seriously with a $7 billion record-breaking deficit to start with.
I am very concerned that the Affordable Care Act is going to be overturned. People, the Republicans in the federal government have been working very hard to have that happen and have been promising to their constituents that it would happen. So that concerns me because, they're looking at 20+ million people who will be out of insurance coverage. Not to mention, there are things that people don't realize are covered even if you do have insurance, like not being penalized for having a pre-existing condition. And with COVID, look at all the people now who have pre-existing conditions. There's also racial and economic inequities that it speaks to. There's the idea that you can keep your 26-year-old on your insurance and free preventative care, including breast exams. So these are all really important things. And I think that we have to try our best in this state to protect all of those things should it go away. We were working on an option so that people could have access to health insurance similar to what I'm able to get as a representative up in Hartford. And we want to open that up and let everybody have an opportunity to get the insurance and the health care that they deserve.
All right, and then we're coming to the end of the forum here. And so just like in the beginning, you guys will have 90 seconds to go up for closing statements. I believe Len went first for the opening statements. So then Mary, you will have go first for the closing statements.
I'm sorry. I thought it was Len. I apologize. So thank you again, Matt and the Record Journal, for holding this event. It was very different, but as much of our lives are now, and it's important for voters to have the opportunity to hear from the candidates. I'm proud of all we've accomplished over the past 2 years, but there's absolutely more to do. The upcoming legislative session will have many challenges and difficult decisions that need to be made. In facing these challenges, I make you the same promise that I did 2 years ago. I will represent the values of our district by fighting for access to quality, affordable health care, for a woman's right to choose, for workers' rights and the growth of our economy, for protecting our environment and quality education, for racial justice, and for equality, opportunity, and respect for all. I will continue to work with my colleagues at the Capitol and in federal and local government to find solutions to problems and to make government work for the people of our state. Lastly, but most importantly, as the Senate Chair of Public Health, I will fight hard to ensure that we get through this crisis, keep the infection rate low, and successfully open the state by following the science and listening to experts. I'm proud of the people of Connecticut as our state continues to be a national leader on pandemic recovery. We will get through this crisis because we will do it together. The voters in the 13th district have a clear choice. I hope I've earned your vote. Your vote has never been more important. Be safe and stay well. Thank you.
All right, and then Len, over to you.
Okie dokie, thank you. I think when voters make their decision, they should look at a number of factors. One is my record when I was in the Senate. I successfully capped the gas tax, the hidden gas tax. I stopped dead in its tracks the mileage tax, which the legislature was bent on passing. I stopped the tolls, which I still think are a bad idea. And as I say, totally unjustified because no one's ever laid out an honest budget. And you can't advocate for tolls until you know what the real needs are. And even Mary Abrams admitted that. She hasn't seen a real budget yet. And until you do, you can't figure out how you're going to finance it. I know that I've got the credentials for the circumstances too. I've got a background in economics and finance. I have a degree in finance from the Wharton School. And I do accounting and I know numbers. I eat, sleep, and drink budgets. And that's what we need. Someone who's a budget hawk. And I've proven that. I've gone after the phony transportation budget. And when they don't give me the answers, I demand them. I'll go and take them to court. And I am going to be in front of the Freedom of Information Commission shortly to address the cover-up. The numbers are trying to hide from us that are the backbone for their toll scheme, basically. So I would ask the voters to take a look at what I've been able to do and what my credentials are. I think that given the crisis, the financial crisis we're going into, my background makes me the perfect candidate to represent Senate District 13. It would be an honor. I can tell you I will be passionate like I was when I was in the Senate. I will meet with my constituents all the time. And I believe constituent service is #1 priority too. Thank you. I want to say thank you to the Record Journal, to you, Matt, and to you too, Richie. I think it's a great service that the Record Journal has done to educate the people about an important race and the differences between Mary and myself. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you. And that brings us to the end of tonight's forum. Thank you to both Len and Mary for joining us and for everyone that tuned in. We had a pretty lively discussion going on the Facebook page throughout the debate. And there is, I think a lot of people, it was great that they got to hear from both candidates ahead of the elections. So
I can hear my grandchildren in the background saying, "Grandpa, come up here."
So as mentioned towards the beginning, the Record Journal has the Voices initiative that we started this election season. If you go to myrecordjournal.com/voices, you can submit your questions and what you want the candidates to be talking about. Coming up next week, we will have another forum with the 16th State Senate District, and we're trying to schedule some others. So thanks everyone for tuning in tonight, and I hope everyone has a great evening.
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks,
Mary,
guys.
good night.
Good night.
Richie and Matt, you too.
Thanks, Len.
It worked. Do it again.